head, my heart, and my understanding.
Amen.
Amen.
Beginnings. So we're going to begin. Thank you. Sometimes beginnings get delayed a bit. You never know about beginnings. They're interesting to behold and befriend. And that's what I want to talk about this morning, is beholding and befriending the beginnings of things. This morning, the beginning of the month of February has a couple of special meanings in the church. One is the fact that it is the feast of the presentation, remembering what I read, the story I read in the gospel, of Jesus being brought to the temple, and of Simeon and Anna beholding that this was something special and befriending that by proclaiming it and speaking of it to other people. And we can assume that they continue to speak of it after this one little story about it. It's also a special day. It's the feast day of St. Bridget of Kildare, who, one of her many things she's patron of, she's patron of midwives and newborn babies. So we have almost a newborn baby someplace back there. Bridget is watching over you, newborn baby. It's also, for this church, in Black History Month, as an historically Black church, it is a day to remember our beginnings. And there are many ways that we will behold and befriend that. So what I want to do this morning is I want to kind of touch on all those things. The beginnings, the beholding and the befriending of beginnings, and especially the beholding and befriending of our own Simeon and Anna figures throughout the life of the church. For me personally, this really is a month of beginnings because I began life in this month. My birthday is on February 26th. I just sort of barely slipped in there at the end of the month, but it is that beginning for me. It was also a beginning for me on a Sunday in 1986 at St. John's Episcopal Church. It was not yet the cathedral. When at the major Sunday service, I was ordained a deacon in the church. This is the anniversary of my 49th. This is my 49th anniversary of my ordination to the diaconate. It's been a long time. It's also, for me, this month, a new beginning. Some of you may have received or seen on Facebook the beginning of a email publication that I'm going to be sending out monthly. It is a way of offering a kind of a spiritual guide for the month. This month it's called The Wisdom of Trees. Each month I'll have like a photo that sort of reflects something because some people are drawn to the visual. I'll have a brief story of a beholding and experience that has occurred in my own life. And I'll have a prompt that suggests a way that you might be mindful of beholding and friending the moments of your own lives in the ordinary course of life. This is not a guide for how you go off and do something separate from life. It's more a guide of how you look at the beginnings of every moment in life in a way that beholds and then befriends them. So that was my beginning today. So the beholding and the befriending has become a very big part of this beginning for me. To me, what beholding means is similar to what people talk about when they're talking about being mindful of a moment, of what's going on in a moment. And for me, it is that, but it is also being mindful of what the Spirit of the living God might be seeking to nudge me towards in that moment. And that's where the befriending comes in. If the beholding of a moment is the way we pause and allow ourselves to become mindful of what's going on in the moment, what there is in the moment that is or could be beautiful, what there is in the moment that is or could be true, what there is in the moment that is or could be good, what there is in the moment that is or could be at one within this interconnected oneness of diversity, magnificent diversity that is life itself. These are all involved for me in beholding and befriending a moment in time. And that's what we see as we look at our scriptures today. It's interesting because I hadn't really looked at the psalm when I was thinking about this, but right in that moment, there were words that struck me in a beholding kind of way. To befriend life by lifting up our heads, to befriend the moments of our life by lifting up the gates that close us off to the movement of other people or of all creation and of the Spirit of God, to lift up those gates, and the assurance that when we befriend life that way, the Spirit of God is going to enter in a way that we can behold. That's what we see in Simeon and Anna, in the story of Simeon and Anna. We see people who, they may not have talked about it as beholding and befriending, but they beheld and befriended life every day. Sometimes people like that were called prophets, like Anna was, and like Simeon is now, but may not have been in his own day. But they're people who aren't afraid to be present to life moment by moment, whether anything's going on obviously to them or not, but that the life itself is something to behold. So on that day, there were probably many people in the temple. Jesus was in the temple, a baby, in Joseph and Mary's arms. And we hear only about two that actually beheld that that was something special. That wasn't just a baby on an ordinary day in a temple, having the law fulfilled, going back home when he was through. But they came into that temple as they did every day with an expectation that there would be things to behold and things to befriend. And so they kind of show us that, both of them. To enter life with an expectation that there are things to behold and things to befriend. And one of the most interesting things about Simeon and Anna are they're old. They're really old. They're especially old for their time. I mean, they say Anna was 84. That's not seeming so old now. But it certainly was in that time. And we know Simeon was in his later years because what he says is, I can leave now. It's okay. I can depart in peace. According to your promise that you will always hold me in your hands, O Lord, with your grace. I can depart in peace because I have seen what I've been looking for. I've seen what I've been looking for. That's the attitude of beholding and befriending moment by moment, regardless of how old we are. I mentioned that I'm resident in the Diocese of Southern Ohio. In that diocese, every year, the diocese gave a Simeon and Anna award. Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, and I may be fuzzy, so if anybody's listening from the Diocese of Southern Ohio and I don't say this exactly right, you can fill me in, I'm sure you will. and I will correct it somehow. What I remember about it is that every year, churches, parishes throughout the Diocese of Southern Ohio, the Episcopal Diocese of Southern Ohio, would decide somehow, either by vestry or by parish vote or just by obviousness, a woman and a man who were in older years, I think he had to be at least 65 or older, who demonstrated in the life of their parish and maybe also in the life of the diocese and also in the life of their community, that way of looking for the presence that would move them to action. Not just looking and then going home and saying, oh, that felt so good. To behold the Spirit of God. But looking with the expectation that when you behold the Spirit of God present at any moment of your life, it's going to move you someplace, to do something, to respond in some way, to befriend with what you beheld. And so they wouldn't have described it exactly that way, but that was sort of the type of criteria you were looking for when you sent in the names. And then I don't remember how they finally came down to who received those awards. And I'll leave you to go to the Diocese of Southern Ohio, and if they're still doing it, you can read that on their website, I'm sure. But the point is that there are Simeons and Annas all around us, and some bit of Simeons and Annas within us as well. And on this day of beginnings, as I think about the holding on the Feast of the Presentation, Simeons and Annas, and I think especially about how certain African Americans have been Simeons and Annas for me. I want to first just share a couple of mine with you, and then I'm going to give you a moment to think a little bit, and then to maybe share your own Simeons and Annas who were African American that you met or shared life with or shared parish with back then. For me, the first that came to mind were three writers. A Simeon, Howard Thurman, who was the spiritual director to Martin Luther King Jr. and many, many other what they called sacred activists in their day. They considered themselves sacred activists. King even has mentioned this in some of his more unknown writings, because they connected what they were doing with the Spirit of the Lord moving them to do it. Thurman helped introduce them to the practices that I'm calling beholding and befriending. He would have called them more contemplation and action. But this idea of contemplative action was what tied their writings, their actions together. It was both for a social need, but it was fueled by the Spirit of God that they beheld in them, moving them to do something to set God's people free. On a more personal note, I think about this parish. And I think especially about those years between 2000 and 2008 when I was the vicar. And the many, many Simeons and Annas we had in the parish. You might, as you let your mind roll, those of you who were there then and before, you might let your minds go back to those before I ask you to share a couple. Standing out for me, of course, Albert and Lillian Winton. Ms. Winton sat about right where Tim was. Mr. Winton was usually up here doing what John does a lot of times, which is anything that needed to be done. And when I met them, they were beginning to get older, and they continued to get older. But until they just couldn't do any more, they always had that sense of beholding the Spirit of God moving them to something. And so they were kind of my Simeon and Annas in St. Luke's. In my very personal life, going back to my childhood and early adolescence, there are three people that made a really big difference in how I saw life, in how I saw the life that they lived, and the life that they hoped their children would live, and they wanted their children to live, and how they beheld whatever they could do to do that. Apparently, part of what they beheld was teaching me. Mm. And so the first one I remember, her first name was Ophelia, and I'm not really exactly sure what her last name was, because one of the first things I remember is she said, "You are to call me Auntie." Mm-hmm. And I always called her Auntie, thinking that I was calling her two words, aunt and the word T-E-A-T, because every time she came over, she and my grandmother had tea together. And so I thought that's why she was Aunt T. She made for me my first doll of color. It was a little rag doll. She was a great seamstress and a very artistic woman. But when my grandmother, who was not always real well, was kind of needing to not deal with me, Aunt T would take me off to do things. We'd go to where she and her husband had a little laundromat over on the other side of the tracks, of course, in Bunkie, Louisiana. This was the 1950s. And I would spend the afternoon there, sitting on a stool behind the counter. She would rock me in the rocking chair and tell me stories. And she didn't so much tell me things about life, she just showed me how to love and what that looked like. I've never forgotten it. Then there was BB, whose name was really Essie B. Harris. And my mother had told us we should call her Miss Essie, except the first day she was there, she said, don't call me Miss Essie, call me BB. That's what all the children all over my neighborhood call me. I'm BB. And it kind of meant, in that neighborhood, it sort of meant like a grandmother. Though she had children my age, but that was the sort of influence she had on the neighborhood where she lived. She did this kind of the same type of thing that Aunt T did with me. We would just sit and talk, or I would help her do something, or she taught me how to iron without leaving a print of an iron on things. She taught us all how to make up a bed the right way. We were making it up the wrong way. She taught us skills, but while she was doing that, the conversation always was a conversation that said you're loved. And she'd hug us. Then there was old Robert. What I remember about old Robert was he said, everybody calls me old Robert, and that's the only name I want to ever be called. Old Robert was a prophet. He was a prophet. I would find him at different places. He basically did yard work around our house and other houses in different places, but I'd find him, and old Robert would always have something to say to me. He would always know that I was not happy about something, that I was an adolescent then, that he always kind of sensed my angst, and he would have some time that he would take a break and he would just talk to me. And he would say things like, if you have faith, you could walk on that water. And somehow I knew he wasn't talking about literally walking on that water. He was talking about a little awkward 10th grader being able to find something inside to go to school the next morning without feeling like she needed to play sick because she was too embarrassed to go. Who do you think about within African Americans who have either personally touched your life or who have touched your life through their writings, even if they're no longer alive, or their actions? Just think a minute and then just pop some names out. You don't have to tell stories. We're just going to lift those names up because we're going to give thanks for them. So think just a moment. Who comes to mind?
Jenny Shelby, Sammy Wynn, Rose Spears.
Thank you. Others?
David and Josephine Wayman.
Others?
Homer Bear Jones.
Okay, and who did you say?
Miss Catherine, who
Miss-
I'm named after.
Who you're named after, okay. Others? Others?
My Nana and my Nani.
Others?
Clinton Hitman, my dad.
Others?
Principal and assistant.
So all of these names, and I know that you couldn't all tell what names they were given, but they've been spoken in this room and our spirit knows now. I encourage you over the month of February to think more about the African Americans in your own life, whether you're white or black, are a person of another color, whoever you are, think specifically about the African Americans who have shown you what it is to live and love and celebrate the magnificent diversity of the oneness that is life. Amen.
Amen.